Right. So first and foremost, welcome everybody to the tree care focusing on fruit and nut trees with Jessica Robertson of Wildcraft Permaculture. We are super excited to have all of you join us today. And as we can see from the short little intro from people jumping in early, we have people from all over who are joining us. And so thank you for all of our American friends and our friends out east and out west that have come to join us today. As we begin, I just want to take a moment for us to acknowledge the land that we do stand on and that we have been able to inhabit it as a privilege. So the Westminster Pond Center acknowledges that it stands on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lunapawak peoples, who for time immemorial have had long-standing relationships with the land and water that surrounds us. We also acknowledge the local First Nation communities in this area, of which are Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Chippewa and Munsee Delaware Nation, of whom continue to be stewards of the land today. We at the Westminster Pond Center place high value on the significant contributions, both historical and contemporary, of local and regional First Nations, and strive daily to work and grow alongside communities towards a better future. Especially as we move forward with this workshop, we really ask that people take this to heart. And this is a core pillar of what the Westminster Pond Center is really trying to do in our efforts towards truth and reconciliation and being good stewards of the environment alongside of our First Nation partners. So a little bit of housekeeping. Once again, please keep your mics muted throughout the session. Place all your comments in the chat in order to be safe for the Q&A segment. This is a recorded line, so you will receive a recording within 48 hours of this ending. And at the very end, there will be a survey. So please tell us how we did in that survey at the end. We do use this information to constantly improve so that we can bring better workshops, webinars, and opportunities to all of you. So a little bit about the opportunity that was able to bring this webinar to us. The Signal Boost Initiative is a project of Reforest London and the Westminster Pond Center for Environment and Sustainability. And the center itself is a developing community hub with services and programming that promote environmental excellence, sustainability, health, and well-being across our region. And so the Signal Boost Initiative has a goal of dramatically increasing the number of public and volunteer environmental educational opportunities that are available in London. And thanks to the support of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, the Signal Boost Initiative is able to exist. And we were very fortunate to be able to support Jessica once again in being able to bring this information to a wider audience. So we would like to first and foremost, once again, thank the Ontario Trillium Foundation and also thank Canada Life, who is the lead sponsor for Reforest London, for being able to allow these things to happen. For all of you, we would really love for you guys to stay up to date with us and connect with us. So you can connect with us on all of our major social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and also please stay up to date with our events tab at www.reforestlondon.ca. There are numerous events and Jessica is going to be with us throughout the beginning of the year. So feel free to tune into a variety of her permaculture related events that are going to be happening later on this year. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jessica. So Jessica has a wealth of knowledge and experience within the world of permaculture. She has a passion for the natural world that shines through in all that she does. She is a trained urban planner and she applies her permaculture principles and shares her love with the London community. We are very, very fortunate for Jessica to be able to share her expertise with us today. And so I will turn it over to her.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen here. Whoop. Sorry. We were testing the sound earlier. Now I'm in the middle of the presentation. Okay, here we go. Yeah, today we're going to talk about fruit and nut tree care. And like Shaquille said, we'll be doing another 6 or 7 workshops I'm going to be teaching until June this year. And then Reforest London, Westminster Pond Center is doing a host of other workshops as well that you should check out. we did all that stuff. Yes, so please remain muted throughout the presentation, and there'll actually be pauses after each section. So I've got section headers, and we'll pause after each section to go through some questions then, and you can place them in the chat box, because I know I forget things from 1 minute to the next, so it's nice to kind of wrap up a section with the questions that are specific to that. So 4 main areas we'll be discussing tonight. We'll start with pruning, then detecting and diagnosing problems, get into holistic sprays for your fruit and nut trees, and then a little blurb on winter preparation and care. I'm just going to move my pictures. Actually, I guess I don't need to see you guys because none of you have your videos on. Okay. So why do we prune? There's 4 main reasons to prune. The first is to allow sunlight to reach all of the fruit. As we know, we need sunlight to ripen our foods. So when there's uneven sunlight distribution, then your fruit isn't all going to ripen at the same time, and some might not ripen properly at all. Second, very important, is to allow breezes through to increase the drying after a rain event. When the water hangs around too long and things don't dry out quickly enough, then that's how you end up with fungal diseases. And then also to create good structural frames. So, an apple tree, cherries aren't, maybe not as much, but apples and pears can be very heavy when your tree is laden with fruit. And so if you don't have strong structural branches and scaffolding, then you can have branches break because of the weight of the fruit. And then also to encourage fruiting spurs. So some, we'll talk about this in future slides, but different fruit trees fruit on different ages of wood. So knowing what ages of wood you need to encourage fruiting, it can help you with how you prune to make sure that you're encouraging that, so that you have fruit every year and not have gaps in your production. Oops. So when we're shaping a tree, it's kind of like when you look at a piece of art in a gallery, usually you kind of start by standing back and looking at it, and you take in the whole piece. And then you're like, oh, that's interesting. And you look in and you look closer and you see all like different details that you didn't notice before. And then when you step back again, you see the picture a little bit differently every time you notice those little details. And so it can be the same thing when you're pruning. You want to take in the overall shape of the tree, and then look in closer at the branch. So you might be like, okay, well, there's not enough light getting through here, or I can see there's not going to be much airflow through here. Like you want to be able to throw a football through different through your scaffolding branches, basically. So when you get in closer, then you can see, okay, well, actually these branches are touching, or determine which one to take out. So these, you can tell that there's a problem here, but which one are you going to remove? You might need to move in closer to look at to figure that out. So you're aiming for tree calmness. Michael Phillips is one of my heroes, and a lot of what I teach, the holistic spray stuff that I teach is all from his book, The Holistic Orchard, and plus some more recent information that he's put out since he published that book. But he basically does all the testing for me. I'm just kind of the messenger. So he says that you want to aim for tree calmness. If you take off too much, it can be detrimental to the tree, but it also can spur excessive growth afterwards to compensate for that loss. So you kind of want to take off just enough to encourage fruiting and to make sure that you have those drying breezes get through and your sunlight, but not to take off too much. And some of that is the timing of when you cut as well. So we'll get into that a little later. And then when you're shaping the tree, the ideal branch angle is between 45 and 60 degrees. So if your branch is kind of like this, that's good. If it's up too tight, you can have problems with water and rot happening here, but it actually has it's not as strong a joint, it's not as strong a union. So when you have that heavy fruit, it can weight it down, and then it's more likely to break because the cell tissue is not as strong here. It can't bear the same amount of weight load. And I mean, I've seen some orchardists actually like train their trees more than horizontal. So they're actually pointing down. And I think there's some aesthetic. I know we have weeping cultivars of all sorts of trees, but it just looks a little weird. And that can spur earlier fruit production, but it's not necessary really. Like 45 to 60 degrees is good. So there are three main shapes that we usually train to. So the first is called a central leader, and this is most of your palm fruit is trained this way, apples and pears. And so you've got a central trunk, and then your fruiting scaffolding is coming off of it, and then your fruiting spurs are on those. And palm fruits best on 3 to 10-year-old wood. So you need to be planning ahead to make sure that you're doing renewal pruning to encourage the tree to always have new fruiting spurs coming into production every couple of years. Open vase is, open like a V, and is used more for peach, nectarines, and apricots. It lets a lot more light in. They need more light for even ripening. So, and they also are more prone to some of the fungal diseases. So it lets a little more breeze through. And Japanese plums are trained this way as well. Modified central leader can be used for cherries and European plums, sometimes for apricots. And so this is just, you still got sort of a main trunk, but it's a little crooked. And then you might, as you're doing your renewal pruning, that central leader might shift a bit, might become a new leader down the road. So there's basically two kinds of cuts. There's thinning cuts and heading cuts. And thinning cuts are the scariest ones to make, but they're the most important ones to make. They are when you are removing an entire branch. So one of the common mistakes of pruning is just to, my tree's getting too big, I'll just kind of give it a haircut and basically shape around the outside of it. Those are heading cuts. And that's actually going to encourage a lot of extra growth and splitting of those branches into multiple branches. And then you're going to have an even fuzzier, frizzier head of hair on your tree next year. And what gives the tree calmness, like Michael Phillips says, is the thinning cut. So this is where you're removing at a branch union where one branch is joining another, you're removing that entire branch. And so you can see where they've made these cuts on the top here. And then what the response from the tree is afterwards, it sends some more growth into these shoots, but it doesn't regrow at that spot. So this, you're going to be taking off dead and diseased wood. You're going to be taking off branches that are crossing each other, any branches that are touching, or limbs that are growing towards each other or towards the center of the tree. So you're aiming for that openness and sun exposure and breeze exposure. It's helpful to start at the top and thin from the top down to follow the sun and be able to see kind of how that sunlight's going to be getting down to the fruit. And then you can also take out the spent wood that's not bearing well anymore. So it might not be diseased or rubbing on other branches, but once that limb has been producing for 10 years or so, and it's not, there's not really much production happening on it anymore, then you can take that limb off and encourage a new fruiting spur to develop nearby. So if done properly, these thinning cuts will heal quite quickly and are unlikely to introduce disease. And that's because of there's the special cells that grow at those branch unions. And when you cut adjacent to those, it spurs them to heal that wound and to close it off. And you'll see that it's kind of like a collar. And so you'll see if you go out, this is the problem with not doing it live, you can go out and look at trees in your neighborhood and you'll see where things have been pruned. There's this thicker bark that starts closing in. And if you have a really large branch, it might not ever close. It kind of needs to, it can take about 5 years. And if it hasn't closed in 5 years or 6 years, then it's probably never going to close completely. But if it's on a thinner diameter branch, it should be able to close in a couple of years, no problem. And I'll show you some videos of these cuts after I explain them both. So a heading cut is done midway across the branch. So it's not at the branch union. They don't heal as well because they don't have those special cells to take over. And they can be used to keep production happening closer to the trunk. They can be used if your leader is getting too tall and lanky. Your tree's putting all this energy into growing up. So if you cut off that central leader, then it starts putting energy into its branches. And then same with if your branches are getting too long and lanky and they're getting, they're really thin and spindly, they're going to not be able to bear much weight, and they're going to take longer to fruit. So if you actually give them some heading cuts, they'll start putting growth energy into girth as well, and they'll be able to support more weight and they'll produce earlier as well. Or sorry, they won't produce earlier. It'll delay fruiting, but they'll be able to bear more down the road and be stronger. So these you often do these when you're making these cuts. You look at the bud. You cut just above a bud that is pointed in the direction you want the next growth to go. So say you've got these two branches, and you want to encourage. The trunk is here, you want to encourage growth this way away from the trunk, and you've got a little bud here, you're going to cut just above that bud, and then that bud will start growing in that direction. And then for fruiting trees that produce on new growth, like the apricots and peaches, they produce only on new growth. So you need to be constantly producing those new tips for them to bear on. And so you want to be doing heading cuts to encourage that. Oops, hold on a second. Oh yeah. Okay. So this was a couple years ago at the beginning of COVID, when I was like, I have to teach online. And I was obviously quite pregnant at the time. So this is a demo of the thinning cut. I apologize for the traffic noise and the wind. Hopefully everybody can hear all right. And then we'll go over the heading cuts.
Okay, so this is a cherry tree that was planted a few years ago and hasn't been pruned at all yet. And there's some major problems with it. It's doing pretty well, but there are some branches that are undesirable. And if we want more fruit, then we're gonna do some pruning on it to keep it healthy and productive. You can see that this is where the point of the graft was. So the branches above this point are the cherry that we want. This big branch, unfortunately, this nice healthy branch, is growing below the point of the graft. So we don't know what kind of cherries this will produce, if any. And so that's the first thing we're going to remove. And we're going to do a thinning cut on it, which means we're going to remove the branch at the base. You can see here, an old thinning cut was done here, and those special cells and bark are growing over to slowly close that up. If you leave a little stub, which is the mistake that most pruners make, you leave that little stub there, it's just going to rot and dry out and bring infection into the tree, and the tree won't be able to close its wound properly. So you need to cut right up to this special bark that looks kind of like wrinkled skin. That's where you cut up to. I'll do a demo actually on this branch we're taking off. So this skin that's right around here is the special skin that's going to be able to, or the special cells that are going to easily, I didn't go in there tight enough. So now this should be able to close over nicely. And the smaller the branch is when you take it off, the more easily that wound will heal. This was taken off when it was pretty big, so that will still take a couple years to grow over, unfortunately. And this one, I'm going to use a bigger tool for. Might make 2 cuts here to get as close as I want. If you take these branches and put them in a vase at home, they'll flower. You'll have a nice fragrant bouquet. So now I'm going to clean this up and get a little closer to the, if I can. I might need my saw for that. Okay, I'll do that later with my saw and get nice up close to that bark that will heal that over. It's too bad this wasn't cut when it was smaller, because now that's a big wound for the tree to heal. So these branches are suspect. I'm not sure what they'll be from, whether the rootstock or they're kind of right at the graft point. So, and then this is a multi-cultivar tree, a 4-in-1. So it has Glacier, Bing, Stella, and Van. So obviously we don't want to cut those branches off. And really they're doing okay. One thing we would want to do is weight these down so that we have a better branch angle here. The closer this is up to the tree, the tighter this crotch angle, the less healthy, the less weight it can bear, and the weaker this union is. So if we pull this down for a year and let it grow out as horizontally as possible, then this will be nice strong bark here, and it'll be able to withstand winds and heavy snows and ice storms and lots of fruit. With a cherry, you don't have to worry about heavy loads as much, but with an apple or pear, you can actually break the branches sometimes if there's a lot of fruit. So pause it for a minute.
Yeah, I see a question about weighting it down. We'll go over that in the next video. Yeah, so those were thinning cuts. That was removal of an entire branch section at a union. And so this next video will explain heading cuts, and we'll show you how to weight down a branch.
Okay, so this.
Whoops.
Okay, so.
Sorry, I don't know why it's jumping around here. I'll get it, just a minute. Ah, why is it not playing?
Okay, so we're going to talk about a heading cut now. We did some thinning cuts, and then we're also going to weight some branches down. So this branch of unknown source could be rootstock, could not be. We're going to leave it for now. But this I know is an important one to keep, because this is the Van cherry. So I want to give this lots of room to grow. So I'm going to cut this one. I'm going to cut it back. Not at the base, that would be a thinning cut. I'm going to do a heading cut, and if I do it here, then this branch will become dominant. If I do it here, this branch will become dominant. I don't want branches growing towards the trunk. I want to direct the growth of this out from the base. So I'm going to choose this branch to be dominant, which is leaving a good gap from there. There should be lots of room for them both to grow. So I'm going to cut this off right here. And now this branch will become the main stem here, and there's a nice gap there. There's lots of air can get through there, moisture can dry off so that we don't have rot problems, sorry. one of the things you're thinking about when you're pruning is opening up the frame so that you have lots of sunlight coming in to ripen the fruit. But most importantly actually is the breezes to dry things out after a rain to reduce fungal problems. I'm going to cut this one off as well to, well, maybe we'll weight it down first and then see what we want to do. I'm going to weight this one down. This angle's not bad, but it'll be a more productive branch if it's tied down on a more horizontal angle. And it's still thin enough. It's still thin enough that it's flexible and shouldn't have a problem adjusting to that. I'm just going to do a loose, I'm not going to tie it tight around the trunk. I'm just going to do a loose knot. And this sisal twine will easily just decompose when it's, and by the time it decomposes, the branch will be done. This is a very easy, you can use a brick or a rock or lots of different things to open up that angle. We'll have a stronger join here, and it'll get more light in there as well. So then if I weight this one down, I'll probably want maybe this one will be the dominant branch. So I'm going to cut that there. Stick. Here we go. To find some more sticks, I'll weight this down, and then and maybe this one as well could get weighted down. Then you've got nice open form. And if we wanted to spur production, so cherries will grow on first year growth. So if we wanted to spur more branching, we could cut off, do some heading cuts here to spur these to branch out, and then we would get a little more fruit on these. But I think I've taken enough off this tree for this year. That first big limb we took off was pretty substantial. You never want to take off more than 1/3 of the tree. So we'll leave this for this year, and then maybe next year. These two look like they're going to interfere a bit, so we'd probably take one of those out, or just train the branches away from each other.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know if I was clear about it in the heading cut. So when you make this heading cut in the mid branch area, then it spurs the branch to split afterwards. So instead of common growth, it spurs more growth. So the cut was made here, and now there's 3 branches instead of 1. And here there was a cut made, and then it split in 2. And so keep that in mind as you're making your cuts. Now, one of the things that a lot of people are scared of, I mean, they're scared of making that first cut, and that's understandable. But it is like cutting hair. Like, oh, you should have seen the first haircut I gave my daughter. It was horrible. It was good. It was good fodder for humor and pictures, and it grew back. And trees will regrow too. And it's very unlikely that you're going to do serious damage that is irreparable. So, if you realize the following year that maybe you should have made some different cuts, then you make corrections as you go, and the tree will keep growing. You might not have the same choices you had the year before, but you'll have new choices to make every year, and you'll learn as you go, and they're resilient, and they'll probably be okay. So don't be too scared. It's better to prune and make a couple of mistakes that then you can make modifications for afterwards, than to not prune your tree because you're too scared to do it, and then end up with excessive growth or diseases or poor fruit production. That's not why you planted a fruit tree or nut tree, right? I'm assuming you planted it because you wanted to get fruit and nuts, and not have it be too much work, and not have to spray it with chemicals. So you want it to be healthy, and pruning helps keep it healthy. So renewal pruning is when you're so you've had a branch that's been bearing for a few years and is starting to slow down production now. And then you're going to cut that branch off and allow a new bud to become dominant and create a branch and start and become productive. So timing of pruning, the time that most people do their pruning is in late winter, kind of starting in the next few weeks to through March. You can do your pruning up until bloom if necessary, but ideally before bud break if you can. Now the theories on that are changing a bit now, and there's another book that I really like. There's my two standbys are Michael Phillips' The Holistic Orchard, and then Grow a Little Fruit Tree is my other favorite. And she talks about early summer being the most important time for pruning. So that around the solstice, sort of the end of June, is really good to not have excessive growth. So if you think of, if you're pruning in February or March when the tree is dormant, it went to sleep in the fall with all of this branch structure, and it saved enough sugars in its roots to support all of those branches in the spring when it comes out of dormancy. If you take off, a third of those branches, it wakes up in the spring and it has all this extra sugar. Think of a hyperactive child. What do I do with it? So it sends that into the remaining branches, and then you can have a lot of regrowth happening, and water sprouts, which are these vertical sprouts that grow really fast and straight up, but they're very unlikely to fruit, or they're not very productive, and they can take energy then away from your fruit production. So in Grow a Little Fruit Tree, she talks about pruning around the solstice, kind of just as the tree is starting to enter dormancy, and it's not going to respond with a lot of vigor. So at that time, it's just starting to, it's pretty amazing. Like in July already, it's starting to kind of slow down and think about winter and store sugars for over the winter. And so if you cut off some branches, then it's going to be storing less sugars for the following year. So this is also good for espalier. In urban areas, like where I live, you don't have as much space. So doing espalier is sort of two-dimensional pruning. And in Grow a Little Fruit Tree too, she's all about, like, even if it's not two-dimensional, but a three-dimensional tree, but keeping it to sort of 8 feet tall, regardless of what kind of root stock you're on. So at that time, you can also remove extra shoots that grew because of any of the heading cuts you did in winter, and you can pinch off vigorous shoot tips to spur fruit production. So you don't even need to cut; you can just kind of pinch off extra buds or shoot tips. And then in late summer, like late July, about a month after your early summer pruning, you can do some thinning cuts and take out water sprouts to reduce fungal diseases and improve light penetration. And they can have a big impact on the reduction of summer fungal diseases. So this is an example of how you would train a young whip into the desired shape. So you've got, at planting, doing a single heading cut, and then the second spring, opening up your crotch angles, and then the third spring, doing out some more spreading and taking out some of your water sprouts, and starting to get that scaffold shape going by the fifth spring. You've got your scaffolding pretty well figured out, so you know which are your main branches that you're going to keep, and you're taking out any extra ones that are too close to each other. You kind of want at least 18 inches between your major scaffolds, and that should ensure enough light and wind getting through. And if you're growing a tall standard tree, you could keep that further apart. But if you're really trying to keep your tree small for ease of care and picking and protection, then you can bring that to 18 inches or a little less maybe. So in Grow a Little Fruit Tree, it's really aggressive. Like, you plant that tree and you cut it down to knee height, basically like 2 feet tall at the most. And then, sorry, I move my mouse and it jumps to a new slide. So that when you as soon as you plant that tree, you're cutting like half of it off, and it's sort of like, oh my God, really? But then it's going to put a lot of energy into root growth and into getting that stalk, that base established, and good trunk growth. And then you'll have your first scaffolding branches happening at that height. So at 2 feet tall, you'll have your first layer of scaffolding branches, which is super easy for you to pick and for kids to pick. And then you can set the level of your next scaffolding branches by pruning it at that height too. So detecting and diagnosing problems. The first key is to select varieties that are disease resistant. So there are tons of fruit trees out there. Unfortunately, most of the varieties that we're familiar with from the grocery store are not very disease resistant varieties. They're grown in commercial orchards that use a lot of sprays, and they're not great for home orchards for the most part. So, growing your Macintoshes and your Empires and your Spies and Mutsus, they're not easy apples to care for. So there are some varieties like Enterprise and drawing a blank on the name right now, but Whiffle Tree Nursery and Silver Creek Nursery are two that are near London that are really good, and they tell you the disease resistance, what it's susceptible to and what it's resistant to. And so if you select varieties that are disease resistant, you're ahead of the game to begin with. And then encouraging biodiverse, healthy soil and good organisms on your tree as well. Like, so you're on your branches, on your flowers, on your leaves, and on the trunk. You want to colonize your tree with healthy, beneficial microorganisms and fungus. And so that's what we'll talk about in the section on holistic sprays. And then you want to monitor your trees weekly for early detection of any problems. So the earlier you see that there's something wrong, the easier it is to fix it, but also the less invasive or intense your management needs to be. So for insect pests, first thing to do when you see insects out there is know your enemy. So figure out what bug it is and if it's good or bad, or neutral, or maybe it's not good at a certain stage of growth, but it's fine at other times. So once you know what kind of bug it is and what it will do to your tree or not, then you can decide what to do about it. Do you want to trap it? Do you want to repel it? Do you want to attract beneficial allies? like attracting ladybugs for aphids is a great biological control, or use particular holistic sprays that might be especially helpful for that particular insect. And then, so once you determine how much damage the insect is doing, then, you know, if you're growing commercially and you want to sell your produce, then you're going to have a much smaller tolerance. If you're just growing for home use, if there's, you know, some spots on the apple, it's not the end of the world. I mean, your kids might complain, but you just teach them that that it doesn't need to look like the apple in the grocery store, and it's still just as delicious, or cut the skin off or whatever. The problem is, once you start trying to control the system by removing all those insect pests, you're also removing the food source for your beneficial insects. So generally my approach is to wait as long as you can. Obviously there's the trade-off. If you wait too long, then there's too much damage. There might be too much damage done. But you know, really aphids are one of the only major insect problems I've had. And typically if I wait long enough, then they just are controlled by pests. The ladybugs find them. I have a lot of diversity in my system. So I've got all sorts of other plants and native plants and things to attract all kinds of different pollinators. And so eventually they'll find them and they'll call in backup and, you know, come on guys, there's a buffet smorgasbord over here. And then they'll take care of it. And then you might have, you know, the leaves on your bush or tree might be kind of curled up and not very aesthetically pleasing because of the aphids that were on it, but it's not going to do any long-term harm to the tree. So you kind of need to make those decisions as you go. But first you have to know what you're dealing with. For fungal and bacterial problems, fungal diseases you do really need to get on top of as soon as you realize there's a problem. If they're already highly established, there's not much you're going to be able to do for them this year, but you can try and get a head start on next year and prevent the problem from coming back. Often, I mean, it makes sense. We have more fungal issues when you have wet springs or poor drying days in between rain events. Because it's too cool or there's not enough wind, it's too still. So we'll go over this fungal curve diagram that'll kind of show when fungal diseases set in and when it's really helpful to kind of colonize your trees with the good stuff. And then bacterial issues like canker need to be pruned out and you know, get that debris off site. Don't compost it, just remove it from your property and get rid of it. So this is the fungal curve that shows you the best timing of orchard tasks. So you'll see that there's the 2 flushes of root growth in the spring here, and then in the fall you have a lot of root growth. So those are good times to feed the to be feeding the soil with your composts. And the decomposers are very active in the soil at these points, and they will take care of a lot of the fungal disease inoculum that's in the leaf litter and on the soil. So supporting the decomposers at that stage is important. At bud break, and then just at the end of just before dormancy. Red shows you the primary infection period for things like apple scab and rust and different rots. So this is also when you want to be colonizing the surface of the tree with beneficial arboreal life. And then the green curve is showing you the best times to support the underground mycorrhizal systems. So supporting the mycorrhiza fungi in the ground. Sorry, I realized we forgot to take a break after the pruning to go through questions. So I'll just do this slide and then we'll take a break and we can talk about the pruning and this, and then we'll get into the holistic sprays. So the health of the soil and of the tree are the first defense in protecting them against any disease issues and insect pests. So obviously a healthy tree is able to fight off disease, but it's also less attractive to insects. It's amazing. Insects, they can't actually digest the amino acids in a healthy plant. They will only attack unhealthy plants. It's like if you're in your household, you might have, you know, 1 or 2 people that get sick and the other person doesn't. And you're like, how come this person never gets sick? Because they've got a kick-ass immune system, and they're just able to fight stuff off, or maybe they're not as affected by it as another person in the house. So if you work on that immunity of your tree, which a lot of the immunity of the tree comes from the health of the soil. So the healthier the soil, the healthier your tree, and then vice versa. A healthy plant produces lots of extra sugars and exudates that it sends back into the soil to feed the soil food web and the mycorrhizal fungi in there. So it's this cyclical relationship. They're very dependent on each other. So, you know, if you can get this beneficial network going, then you're golden. So most of our fruit tree diseases, we treat conventionally, we treat them with short-term fungicides and antibiotics that destroy those organisms that are sitting on the tree, rather than boosting the immune system of the tree from the inside, and colonizing them with good microbes and good fungus. It's kind of like probiotics. You know, we take probiotics and prebiotics to help colonize our gut with the good stuff, so there's less room for the bad stuff. So that's what we're trying to do with our trees, with the sprays that we're going to talk about in a minute. Yeah, so we did 2 sections there, sorry. Let's pause for a minute and take questions on that, and then we'll have half an hour to go over the holistic sprays. So another book suggestion, Growing Fruit in Northern Gardens, is another excellent book. Thank you, Valerie. Alex asked, what about if you hot compost it? Hot composting might kill the disease organisms, but if you have the option of getting rid of it off your site, I would prefer that, just to make sure that you're not, that any of it doesn't escape. Is there a difference between different fruit trees for timing of pruning? Not really. I guess it depends on what climate you're in. So in my climate, because I remember there's some people on the call that are like from Florida and California. So if you're further south, your timing might be a little different. But in terms of where I am in zone 5, 6 here, yeah, around the solstice would be your midsummer pruning, before your fruit tree breaks dormancy. In the spring is some of your major branches can come off there, like diseased and dead branches and things. And then all your trees are going to start to be they're all going to be starting dormancy work by late July. And so you can really you could prune any time of year. If you prune too late in the season, the tree's not going to have as much time to heal and to close up those wounds before the winter. So that's not great. So kind of like late July, early August would be the latest you'd want to be making cuts on the tree, so that they can get closed over and dried off before the winter. Any other questions about pruning or disease and pests? Okay, and if anything comes up later, we can just jump back to it. It's not like this topic is closed off now. Okay, so holistic sprays. I love this part. My neighbors are always like, what is this? I thought this lady was an eco-nut. Why is she walking around spraying her stuff with this backpack sprayer? Little do they know it's dead fish and seaweed. So there's 4 main holistic sprays of the spring. These are the most critical ones, and I will admit I do not get all of them done every year because I have 3 small children and I'm self-employed and blah blah blah. I've got lots of excuses, and the spring is super busy for my work specifically, so my own garden is always the last thing I get to. It helps if a client wants to pay me to spray their trees, because then I'll make up a batch and I'll do my trees and their trees. But if it's just my trees, I don't always get to it. But if you can, it is ideal to do these 4 sprays in the spring, and these will get your trees off to a good start for the summer and for the fall. And then if you have particular issues, or you're really passionate about doing this, you can keep doing sprays every couple of weeks throughout the year. But these are the most important ones for that disease control. So yeah, the same question as Alex a bit about whether you can hot compost your diseased trees or whether you can burn them. So yeah, burning can release some spores into the air, like for black knot and stuff. I know they don't recommend burning, so better to just get rid of it. That's my recommendation. Okay, so these are all this information's in your handouts as well. The link, Shaquille put the link in early on in the chat there. If you didn't get it, you can go back and find that. So there's a little bit more detail in the handouts that isn't on the slides, but I'll talk about it. But you'll have it in writing in your handouts. So the first spray you're going to be doing, you can do, if you didn't do your fall spray, then you might want to do one earlier than this, like just as greens starting to show up on your tree and on your buds. But this spraying at tight cluster to open cluster when the leaves are just kind of starting to open up or open, then this is when this is the catalyst for those soil and arboreal food webs. So you want to spray on a warm day and wet down the entire branch structure, the trunk, and all the green tissue. And any dripping you have will help kind of wake up those soil organisms and get them multiplying and working for you as well. Your second spray is going to be at pink. So before the flowers are totally open, but when they're still like, when they're opening up from just a little pink smile to still a closed bud. And you're still trying to you're still using this as a catalyst and to colonize the tree with your happy, good microbe communities. At this point, you can be adding trace minerals to help strengthen the pollen tubes. And you don't want to be spraying on open petals, so because that can damage them. So you want to make sure that you're doing this spray before the petals open up, before the flowers open up, sorry. And then there'll be a bit of a gap. And then your next spray will be after petal fall. So once all the petals have fallen off, and you're also adding trace minerals at this point to help with seed development. And you're spraying everything to the point of runoff as well. So you've got some of that falling back down to the soil. And then a week to 10 days later is first cover, and that will be your last spray of the spring. The fruitlets are just starting to show you whether they were pollinated or not. And trace minerals added at this point are going to actually help for next year's blooms. If the tree's planning ahead, it's like the squirrel prepping for winter. Those trees are planning ahead a year. So this is when you would start spraying for particular pests as well. Like if you know you have plum curculio, you could be adding kaolin clay at this point. And we'll talk about in a second here what we're going to put in our sprays. Here's my cursor. So this is your base recipe for a 5-gallon backpack sprayer. I'll talk about each of these ingredients in a minute and what their role is in the spray. So 2.5 ounces of pure neem oil. And this you have to emulsify with dish soap because it's pure oil. It's not going to mix with the water and your kelp and your effective microorganisms. So you measure out your 2.5 ounces and then you mix it up with a teaspoon of dish soap, and that'll help it get suspended in the water. 10 ounces of liquid fish oil. You want this to be a fish hydrolysate that has not been pasteurized. And then you want 6 to 12 ounces of effective microorganisms. And you can buy these as a mother culture. Like if you're going to be doing large areas, you can buy a mother culture and then you can brew it out at a low temperature to get 10, 20 times, 100 times what the mother culture gives you. It's a lot of work. And like if you're doing a whole orchard, you want to be doing it this way. If you're just spraying like 5 trees in your backyard, just use the mother culture. It's a lot easier and your expense is not going to be that big. And then liquid kelp is where you're getting those macronutrients and micronutrients, the trace minerals that you want to be adding in those spring sprays. So neem oil comes from the neem tree, and it has a lot of terpenoids and isoflavonoids in it. So these secondary plant metabolites help stimulate an immune response in the tree. So they help build up that immune system so that it can fight off diseases and pests on its own. And they don't become an issue to begin with. And then the azadirachtin compounds in it inhibit molting cycles of certain pest insects. So it can also break the cycle of insects that you might have had in the past, but then they won't come back in the future because they're not going to be able to molt. And then there's also a lot of fatty acids in the neem oil, and they are fungal food, and they help to feed those fungal organisms that you're spraying on your leaves. And the liquid fish oil, same thing with the fatty acids. It has all the fatty acids in there stimulate fungus in the soil food web. And there's a lot of nitrogen in liquid fish oil. So after the first cover, you don't want to be putting the liquid fish in your sprays. Like if you're doing sprays over the summer and in the fall, you don't want to be adding nitrogen because it will delay the hardening off process, and then it might not be protected well enough for winter. The effective microorganisms increase the microbial diversity of the soil and of your arboreal foliar tree colonies. They enhance the growth of the tree, the yield of the fruit, the quality of the fruit and nuts, and the disease resistance. The effective microorganisms are made up of photosynthetic bacteria, lactic acid bacteria, and yeasts. And you can colonize your own if you don't want to purchase them. They're there are, in Cuba, farmers do it. They brew these big oil drums full of effective microorganisms and with barley and oats and things, and they brew them out, and then they dilute those down and they feed them to their animals and they spray them on their crops. And but it's a scale thing too, right? If you're just working in your home garden, it's a lot of extra work, and it's easy to just purchase it. And liquid kelp has all these, a lot of micronutrients and macronutrients such as boron, copper, iron, manganese, and molybdenum. And the organic matter in it is very readily available in the soil. The enzymes and amino acids in it are good for a lot of creatures across the soil food web. So this is what a 5-gallon backpack sprayer looks like. This is what I use. If you have a smaller, so I can do 10 to 12 moderate sized trees with this. Oops. If you just have a couple of trees, then, sorry. If you just have a couple of trees, then the 2-gallon sprayer might be all that you need. And just make sure that you're not putting chemicals in these. Like if you do use any chemicals, save those for chemicals and save these for your holistic sprays. So there are a few additional sprays that you might want to do. The competitive there's those 4 main ones that I mentioned. Competitive colonization boost. If you are having a particularly wet spring, then if it's a cold wet spring, then there's a potential for if it's a warm wet spring, there's a potential for fire blight, and if it's a cold wet spring, then you can have scab and rust problems. So between early pink and petal fall, when your flowers are open, then you can do up to 3 of these competitive colonization boosts. And because your flower is open, you cannot be using neem or the fish oil fats, because they will damage the flower, and they can potentially kill your pollinators as well, which we obviously don't want. So what you can use for your fats in this recipe is called karanja oil, and it's from the Indian beech tree. It has those same flavonoids that stimulate the immune function as the neem oil, and it can repel foliar-feeding insects like aphids, but it doesn't affect the pollinators like neem does. So I did purchase some of this last year. Both are kind of hard to find, the neem oil and the karanja oil, because of Health Canada regulations, but they're fine to use for cosmetics, but not for growing things, apparently. So there are some places the karanja oil, I think I ordered from a cosmetic place. The neem oil I get from Whiffletree Nursery, but I know other places who were shut down by Ag Canada or whatever, and aren't allowed to sell it anymore. So that source might not be available forever. If you're in the States, not a problem. You can get it, no worries. So this spray uses a lot more effective microorganisms. And then, your blackstrap molasses. I don't think blackstrap molasses you can add to, you can add a 1/2 cup of blackstrap molasses to your effective microorganisms to kind of give them some food and sugars to keep them going. And then this recipe calls for a seaweed extract, which is like a dry powder. The competitive colonization boost can also actually be used if you know that there's going to be a frost. You can spray this the morning before, the day before frost, the morning before, and you would use the cold pressed liquid kelp, not the dry seaweed extract, and that will protect your flowers from the frost. So once you've done these 4 sprays of spring, or your 3 extras, or 1 or 2 or 3 extras if you're doing the competitive colonization boost, then you're working on fruit sizing. And so this is when foliar mineralization, especially calcium and silica can be helpful. If you make cheese or have a good source of whey, then throw that in there. You can put that in any of your mixes, actually. It's high in calcium, and it's been shown to reduce powdery mildew on grapes in Australia, used at 2% concentration every 2 weeks. And it's great for leaf nutrition and arboreal mycology. It has vitamins and minerals in it. So aerated compost teas versus fermented herbal teas, there's kind of 2 camps out there. I haven't taken Elaine Ingham's courses, but Elaine Ingham is a soil food web biologist, and anybody who's taken her course will say that you should never use a fermented tea, but and that they need to be aerated to make sure that you've got the right kinds of organisms in it. But Michael Phillips swears by fermented herbal teas. They're a heck of a lot easier. You don't need a microscope, and you don't need to be examining them as much, and there's less room for not getting it right, and making sure you have all the right organisms you want. If you are going to do an aerated compost tea, you want to try and use fungally dominant compost piles so that you get more higher concentration of fungus in it than bacteria. And if you're closer to a bigger center, there are some companies that will sell aerated compost teas. that they've already, they brew it up, and because it needs to be fresh, you can't make an aerated compost tea and bottle it and sell it like, you know, months later. It doesn't store. It has to be used when it's fresh. So if you're lucky enough to have somebody near you that brews, then you can buy that from them. You know what, there's actually out in Toronto, last year I discovered, like, if you know, a CSA is community shared agriculture. So you pay kind of up front, and you get every week you get a food box from a farm. It's kind of like a farm share. You get a certain amount of what they produce. And somebody had like a CSA for aerated compost teas for your backyard garden. It was great. It was for a very limited area of Toronto, though. It wasn't even the whole GTA. They were kind of, I think they were kind of new, but maybe they're expanding this year. But that was really cool to find. I can't remember the name of them, but you could try and Google them. They were sort of, I think, kind of northeast Toronto. So to make a fermented herbal tea, you basically just fill a 5-gallon bucket with herbs and pour a pot of boiling water over it to kind of release some of those nutrients right away, and then fill up the rest with unchlorinated water, like from your rain tank, and let it sit for a week to 10 days with a loose fitting lid, just so it doesn't all evaporate. And it's going to be really, really stinky, and your husband might get rid of it by accident because they don't know that it's really good stuff, and then berate you for it. But you just need to teach them that it's good and or hide it in the back corner where they won't find it. And then you'll dilute 1 quart of that into a 4 or 5 gallon backpack sprayer. And there are particular herbs. This is in the handouts. I list some of the herbs that can be useful for that. So stinging nettle is one of my favorite ones for me. Like, I love eating stinging nettle, but I also use it in my sprays. It's especially high in silica, and horsetail is another good one for silica. So silica is good for fungal diseases. So if you have fungal issues, making a mix of stinging nettle and horsetail is good. Has lots of trace minerals as well. Comfrey, full of trace minerals, and also provides supplementary calcium. And horsetail for silica. Garlic, if you're growing garlic, when you take off your garlic scapes, I know you want to save some to eat and make pesto and stuff, but throw the rest into your buckets of compost tea, and they somehow they help the cuticles in the leaf open up so that there's better penetration of all these micronutrients and macronutrients in the compost teas. So they ensure they make sure that more of that nutrients is getting into the leaf and the tree. So if you have garlic around, throw that in. And then there's other herbals like wormwood, tansy, wild lettuces, wild dock, comfrey. They can be used for various things as well. Serenade is a commercial fungicide that uses a beneficial bacteria called Bacillus subtilis, and doesn't harm beneficial insects. So if you can find that can be less work than brewing all your own stuff. And if you have trunk borers, then you can make a spray, especially for them, that's at a higher neem concentration. It's double the neem concentration, but you're only going to spray it on like the bottom foot of the trunk. You're not going to spray it anywhere up above that, because it's going to be problematic for other pollinators and for the flowers. Right, if you've got problems with Japanese beetle and stink bugs, it might also work for them, that double neem dose after your petals have all gone. What are we doing for time? Oh, right, I want to leave more room for questions too. Okay, so I forgot, we're done at 7:30, right? Yeah, so I better move it along. Is that right, Shaquille?
Yeah, 7:30.
Okay. Stop rambling, Jessica. So orchard floor management, just a couple more things to go over. Ramial wood chips, if you can get a hold of them, are really great. I mean, all wood chips are good. Mulch is great. Mulch your trees. There are higher levels of micro and macronutrients are found in mulched trees, and it can help moderate moisture and temperature. It keeps weeds away. Ramial wood chips are made with a smaller diameter wood. It's not from large trunks, and it's not just bark. And there's really high soluble lignins in them, and it's a better carbon to nitrogen ratio, so it'll break down faster into a nice stable humus layer. Hay and straw bales can be helpful as well. There are, you know, I'm a permaculturist, so I plant a lot of guilds as well. So I plant things under my trees to help support those trees. And Michael Phillips likes to kind of leave the area under his trees pretty much just mulch and ramial wood chips and hay for the first 5 years, and then start adding in comfrey and chives and things like that. I usually add them when I plant the tree, and then I'll just kind of move them out with the drip line, or cut them back a few times a year and lay them down as mulch. But I don't see them being a problem. I think they can benefit the tree, and they're not going to be competing with it if you plant things that aren't too aggressive. So in the fall, you want to do 3 of these things at least. If you have fungal scab, and the proportions of this are in the handout, you want to add some lime and scatter it on the leaves that have fallen, and kind of mix it in there to get rid of that fungal scab. You can do your final holistic spray of the year when half of the leaves have fallen off. You don't want to do it before then, because then you might break the dormancy cycle. Aggressively mowing, you can't do this if you've got a really solid guild planted under there. Or you can, if they're all soft herbaceous plants, you can go in and mow and kind of flip those leaves over and expose the disease organisms and chop them up, so that those decomposers can break them down. And then you can spread some compost under the tree once it is fully dormant, so that so you're not breaking dormancy. And then for winter, you want to make sure you've got collars on your trees to protect from rodents and deer. With deer, you're going to need taller ones, or fencing. Just make sure that whatever you put on is able to grow and stretch out with the tree, or that you remove it in a few years when the tree's the bark is thicker and not as desirable for those animals, or you're going to girdle your tree, and you won't, then you'll have to replace it. Hard to fix a girdled tree. So that's it. We've got 10 minutes for questions. I'm going to go back through the chat, and feel free to add anything that if you haven't yet. Pure spray green is often recommended in Calgary, 100% mineral oil with no need to rinse. It's marketed as a herbicide and fungicide. I'm not familiar with pure spray green, actually, so I will have to look that up. Do you know what it's made of, Valerie?
Jessica, would you be able to slide back to the previous slide and leave it up?
Sure. Oops. The winter prep?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not sure about pure spray green. If you know what the ingredients are, Valerie, you could post those. Agnes missed the amount of liquid kelp. That's in the handouts. It is 5 tablespoons, optional, depending on whether you want those extra macronutrients or not. Garth says, I'm a beekeeper and have been told by many people to not use neem as it will kill the bees. Yes, so that's why you're not going to be using neem when the flowers are open, because you don't want it getting onto your bees or having them ingest it. So you're using it before the pollinators are going to be on the tree, and then after they're gone and they've done their job. Where can we purchase the spray ingredients? So Whiffletree Nursery in Southern Ontario carries all the stuff that you need for these sprays, and Michael Phillips' book, and the book Grow a Little Fruit Tree. And I think Silver Creek Nursery might carry them as well now, a lot of them. And I think they actually might be teaching a course on this too this year. There's a new owner there. I have a feeling I saw that she's going to be teaching about holistic sprays. And Alex, they like a lot of spraying. You like good food too, right? they like boosting their immune system and eating good quality stuff. But like I said at the beginning, it's not all necessary. I mean, if you can only do some, those 4 sprays of the spring are the most critical ones to set everything up for the rest of the year. So if you can squeeze those in, but also I think once in the last 10 years, I've done all 4 of those sprays. So don't beat yourself up over it. Do what you can. Compost tea question. If the herbs have seeds on them, will the seeds get spread through the garden where the tea is applied, thus introducing those plants where you might not want them? So yeah, if you're doing the anaerobic compost tea, everything is just like this goopy mush when it comes out of there. Those seeds are rotten. They're not going to germinate anymore. But you're also not applying that. You're not applying the goop onto your garden. I take that goop and put it in my compost pile. But you're just taking the liquid, you're straining the liquid out. If you put those chunky things in your sprayer, you're going to clog up your sprayer. So you don't want to do that. I can't get back. Like, where's my cursor? I want to get back to the chat. It closed on me. Another compost fermented tea question. Is there a maximum time for fermenting? Well, I'd say, yeah, 7 to 10 days. I'm not sure if the nutrients start breaking down after that or not. I don't know why the maximum 10 days. Less than 7 days, if it's not stinky enough, it hasn't released all the nutrients yet. Thanks so much. Great presentation. You're welcome. And I don't know why my cursor keeps disappearing on me. I think there's one more question, but I can't see it. Shaquille, can you read the next after Camilda? Was there another question? I can't scroll down for some reason.
Yeah, so Valerie said the label only shows that it's 100% mineral oil. I think it's pyrethian based, a Canadian product.
Okay.
And then Alexandra says, if you don't know how old your trees are, what's a good level to start pruning them at?
A good level, like a good height. Well, you don't want to take off more than 1/3 of the tree at a time. So, I mean, if you want to control the overall height of your tree down the road, if you want it to be as small as possible, then start by taking back like 1/4 to 1/3 of the top, and then working with that.
Sorry, I hope it's okay if I hop in. I don't know like how much they would have pruned in previous years either. Like, is it okay to take off 1/3 every year, or is that?
Yep, 1/3 every year is okay. Yeah, you don't want to do more than 1/3 in any given year.
But would 1/3 every year be necessary, or is that just?
That's the maximum. Not necessarily necessary, no. But you don't want to do more than that. So once you get your shape, once you get your basic shape and scaffolding set, then you're kind of just doing maintenance pruning where, you're taking out those water sprouts, and you won't be taking out 1/3 of the tree. No. But
Okay.
if you've kind of fallen behind on stuff and you're buying a new property and you don't, and you want to get things back in shape, then you might need to do 3 years of taking a third of the tree out to get it back to the shape that you want.
Okay.
So then we have another one saying, has anyone tried any of the homemade garden amendments from Nigel Palmer's book, The Regenerative Grower's Guide to Garden Amendments? He has a lot of great recipes for both biological and mineral amendments.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
And
Other
then
people that can jump in.
another one from Laura. Anything to deter rodents other than collars. Little buggers move up the younger trees with the snow when I can't get to them.
Yeah. So yeah, taking into account the height of your snow is important. Or if the snow gets deep, then you can either go and stomp it down around the tree, pack it down so that they can't reach as high, but also so that they can't tunnel through it. They can tunnel through light fluffy snow, but if it's packed down and it's more like ice, they won't be able to tunnel through it. And then if it's packed down, they won't be able to. It won't be as high to get over your collars. Yeah, I don't know if like the scoot sprays are aimed at deer. I don't know if they would work for rodents.
Scoot does work with rabbits. We use it for
Oh, does it?
deer and rabbits. I'm not so sure about the mice, but I know rabbits, it will deter them.
Mm-hmm. So probably most rodents then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Higher, taller hardware cloth can work too. Yeah. Yeah. And just putting a cage a little further out from your tree.
All right, that seems like it's it for the questions. And I would like to thank Jessica. Thank you so much for taking the time out for all of us, being able to share your expertise. Hopefully it was a great learning experience for everyone. Oh, we got one more question here. So Jessica, one last one for you. Any suggestions for LDD moss?
Right. Just taking them off by hand. I mean, the same applies for the other insects. If your tree is healthy, it won't be able to digest it, and it won't attack it. It won't eat it. So boosting up the immune system of your tree is the best defense. And then if you do see them around, just scrape off their egg sacs and kill as many of them as you can.
So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Please attempt to fill out our survey. If you have a chance, keep an eye on your emails because you will be getting access to this video recording, as well as the links that would have the handouts that Jessica was very nice to provide. Also keep an eye on a bunch of our future events. Jessica will be doing 7 more events with us going from now until June. So please check them out, especially once we start coming in person a lot more. Thank you everyone once again and have a great night.
Thanks, Shaquille. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
This